All right, I'll try one more time. We are not entirely sure what's happening technically with David's. Okay, we're gonna try one more time.
You know what we did? In good old fashion, we swapped mobile phones. So it's, hard to believe that that would make any difference, but it does.
Really?
Hi, Sean.
How are you? All right, I'm terribly sorry for all of this and to everybody who's watching, but we will try one more time. David was just telling us what Hoboken meant. What does it mean?
So it's part of the port, southern port of Antwerp. But before that, in the Middle Ages, and Bruegel made an etching titled the Fancy Fair at Hoboken, which is quite well known. And the center of Hoboken, surprisingly, although it's been bombed in the Second World War quite heavily because of its industry, still looks quite a bit like Breugel's etching.
Wow.
And so that's where I am. It's kind of, as a former industrial area, it's heavily polluted. And still today, there's a lot going on about the last big lead and metal processing plant that's right here. Children have too much lead in their blood, and so there's still a lot of, but it's starting to change, and it's really the more quiet part of Antwerp, I would say. It's right by the river.
You're doing an amazing job for the real estate agents who are watching.
We could do much better, but I'm trying to, I'm here.
Are you trying to sell an apartment or what?
No, not at all. I'm here because it's a way of escaping town. So, I wanted to buy actually a farm, but I missed a wonderful farm, which was a sadomasochistic club, really with a wonderful view on the nuclear power plant of Antwerp. And I just missed it.
Strangely enough, when we organised this tea time, this was not the direction I thought the conversation would go in.
So that's how I ended up here. So I bought this place instead of my Sado farm.
Let me get this straight. You were trying to buy a farm that was an S&M club that had a beautiful view of a nuclear power plant.
It depended on the direction you would look. If you would get up in the morning, you would look at the power plant. But then if you would turn your gaze to the left, you would actually look at the sea.
It's very much niche real estate, really, isn't it? I mean, I can imagine not everybody would have been beating down the doors to buy that particular property, but apparently somebody unhappily pipped you to the post and you lost it.
Exactly, like a day before. And so out of frustration, I bought this place. Which is as quiet.
Did this used to have any other seditious previous incarnations?
Oh yeah, sure.
Did it involve the Catholic Church or anything of that?
Oh, it also includes a well documented murder, which finalized in the oven, because this was a wood. How do you say it? It was a carpenter's place and a construction. Where they kept construction materials, and at one point the corpse was burned in the stove, in the industrial stove here. And I only learned that the day of when I signed the contract. I'm not sure if it would have changed anything.
Before or after you signed the contract?
At the moment, just when I shook hands. That was pre-COVID times.
Wow. Well, what is it with the Belgians and all these sort of strange pastimes that they engage in?
I think the Belgians, there's a lot of, I tried to explain that a few days ago to someone, there's a lot of implicit, like Italians, there's a lot of implicit in the language they speak, things that you don't say, you don't express, but you're supposed to understand.
I see.
So it's kind of...
I hate to break into this fascinating conversation, but we are supposed to be talking about art, not S&M clubs and vile murders in your property. I've spoken to you a few times during this period, And each time I've spoken to you, you seem quite sort of jolly about it. And you were sort of talking about the fact that you quite enjoyed the isolation, and you felt like you were made for this moment. Can you elaborate on that?
It made me like in the first month of the Corona crisis. It made me think a lot about the first months or year when we came back to Antwerp, coming from Berlin, and how much I enjoyed having my own studio and being pretty much on my own. There were not so many people around, and I think what I liked was that, from one day to the next, there was nobody at the studio, and there was a lot of time for wasting time and be busy with all sorts of stuff that you wouldn't be. And basically, for me, Corona solved the problem that I had lying around for a long time, which was, how do I reform my studio? And how do I gain back a bit more time for myself, I suppose, and for ideas? And it did just that, but the small complication that came with that is that I realized that, this way you can't produce work. Because I depend on those people that I work with. So that seemed like a minor problem compared to the happiness of. So Corona solved the problem in a way, but we're back on track, and we've recorded. We were on site recording a month ago, and now in post-production, and everything's going very well.
Because I guess we should explain that you are very process dependent. You're very, you're more like a sort of small film studio than you are a regular artist studio. So you have a lot of people working with you. And obviously when that first wave hit, they probably couldn't come to work and weren't able to. So the benefit was that you had time to think and explore ideas, but the downside was you couldn't actually make any work. So how much is that, do you think, going to change your immediate thinking about your practice?
It's a little bit like if you have a lake that's frozen and Corona throws a stone into it. The next day the lake freezes again, to say it with Hölderlin, and then you need to find another way of breaking that ice open. And so I'm just paying a lot of attention that things do not go back to normal. So that I think we just changed. We don't work from Monday to Thursday or to Friday anymore. It's just going to be more project based. And other than that, I think we'll be working with 2 or 3 people, but not like it was before with, and scratching my head. Oh my God, how do I have to pay all those people all the time?
So you reached a point where you felt that you were servicing the studio rather than the studio was servicing you in some way.
Yeah, that was going on for quite a while, and I suppose a lot of artists have that at one point. With what we are doing, it's a bit more natural because this is something you do together with other people. The only thing I really do on my own is my drawings.
Right.
I mean, that's where sometimes makes me drunk of happiness of just being by the drawing table and being on my own and working until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, this kind of things. But it usually happens during winter, and in summer I try to do all those things where I need to be on location for, right, where you need to have a particular light. And you could think a lot of work happens behind the computer, but it doesn't really. There's a lot of research that needs to be done on location. And
so David, it's interesting. Your drawing process has always fascinated me, because if you think about a lot of artists who work with film and video, the notion of storyboarding occurs where somebody can be preparing some sort of storyboard or edit or ideas for how the film will be made or shot. But that's not what you do at all. In many instances, the drawings are being made, in most instances, I think, the drawings are being made after the film is made. So
yeah, exactly.
So how does that process, how does that function for you, and how does that feed into the ideas in the film and the production of the film?
First thing I should say is that I'm terrible at storyboarding. I didn't have also film training. I think by now I could say I'm an expert through experience, but I never work with storyboards. And usually when I start my drawings, it's when I can't do much more, when the work is given out in post-production, and when there's all these little things that are highly specialized that someone needs to study on. And you won't, some people, you know me, but some people won't believe that I'm very, in a way I'm chaotic and I'm impatient and I can't get my mind together. And that's probably why I made such an exercise of making such, lengthy productions. And what was I saying? So that, so I'm not good at storyboarding. And when I'm drawing, it's usually when the work is being done in the studio already, when it's being processed and towards the end. And it's often a way of getting my mind back together, it's getting things wrapped together again. Because, there's such a fragmentation going on when you work whenever it's film or like we do in 3D painting and compositing and you name it. There's so much fragmentation going on. You can so easily lose your idea, that which you're ultimately following. You can so easily lose it during the process, and in a way you need to also, because I think that's part of the game, is that you kind of, it's like you've catched something and you need to let go of it during the process, and then when it's almost, when it's going to disappear, you just grab it at the very end and you bring it all back.
Is that to enable the piece or the project to have a life of its own rather than something that's imposed by you?
Yes. It's a way of also letting things happen, because people often have the tendency of thinking that it's all very well prepared and very cerebral and that it's all, scheduled, which it's not. I mean, my studio is so chaotic. You have no idea of the important decisions that we take at the end of the work.
I've got two very specific questions for you about process. I'm glad to see you're not drinking tea because it's a little late for you, but I'm having a cup of tea with Marcel Duchamp this afternoon for you, and you're drinking good Belgian beer, no doubt. I have two, oh, very good. All right, we'll get them on as an advertiser. I have two very specific questions about your filmmaking, which are perhaps a little unfair because they're quite complicated. But a lot of people who know your work, even who know your work or who love your work, could, I think, be, it could be reasonable for them to go from film to film throughout your career and really feel as if they're viewing the work of many different filmmakers, or that many of the projects do not directly link up to the project before, or even look similar, or have similar themes or ideas or formal presentations. Can you talk about, in your mind, what links the work through your oeuvre?
They do look very different sometimes, and I remember a few years ago when we were together in Basel, I had at the Showlager, I had Olympia running,
yeah,
which was the Olympic Stadium in Berlin, 1936. And at the art fair, we showed together The Pure Necessity, which was a Jungle Book animation lookalike.
And you confused even me, never mind everybody else.
So no one came and said, I like both works. They, it was either one or the other. And, they didn't say like, this looks like work from two different artists. But yeah, I think I can link them together. Although I do, I think one should give place to a way of being several artists in a single career, although it's not about that in this case. But what's always there in each of the works, and I think that includes the drawings or other stuff that I do, is that there will always be two things, 1 + 1. Like the idea of the binary, a 0 and a 1, that from which you can create a universe, but that will you can always recognize them as being contradictory. And to make things very, very simple, in the pure necessity, because we were talking about that, you have all this energy in the original Disney movie, and then you have the life of retired, bored animals kept in a an animal park. So you have these two things which you couldn't possibly bring together.
Yeah.
And in Olympia you have something similar going on. You have natural time, seasons, the decay of matter and stones and vegetation creeping up and growing. And then you have this idea of 1,000 years, which basically is infinite time conceptually. And you have those two things. There will always be, in everything I do, there will always be a marriage of two fighting factions.
Do you set out thinking about a project looking for those two elements, or do you recognize them when you've finished?
Oh no, they're there right away. And what I recognize when I have an idea is I recognize a gap that's too large to bridge in other ways, and I have to put them into a picture over time. So it has to be video usually. It has to be film or video, because of the way one can use time in that medium. It could have been theater. I mean, it could have been something else. But what I always was interested in since the beginning was that the process of making would be complicated, but then the process of showing would be very simple. So because I was thinking, what if I die tomorrow, and the work will still be there in another way, so it won't be so hard to just a banal way of thinking about the projected image as something that can travel light and fast.
So my other question is, David, you sort of came of age as an artist at a moment of extraordinary creativity in Belgium, but very specifically in Antwerp in many respects. And that was across the board. So it was fashion, design, dance, theater, video, artists, painters, sculptors. And I've always felt that there is it's difficult for me to imagine how I can frame this, but I've always felt there's a very Belgian sensibility in your work, even though it's difficult to think of many other videographers who are working in that way from Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to share with many of your colleagues who've gone on, as you have, to be very successful, a very Belgian sort of tone or sensibility. Do you think that's true? Is there in this flowering, this moment of creativity, is there a particular sensibility at work?
That's a hard one to answer, because it's like asking to someone, can you describe your own portrait or your own...
that was going to be my next.
But I think you're probably right when you refer to that period, like let's say beginning of the 90s, middle of the 90s, up until the year 2000. Antwerp is not yet, I think Antwerp, or maybe the region, is not yet fully developed in terms of, it's still a little bit backwarded. It's not fully developed in terms of anything that's global. It's still a small town. and it probably, the city probably feels the energy in the periphery, but not yet in the city itself. So I think that generates a lot of spontaneity, maybe. I'm not sure if I get that right, but it's possible. The reason why I'm a little bit skeptical about describing my own, so where I grew up and when I grew up and in which context, is because it always, you always hear the aging yourself. Yeah? You think about yourself as it was better then than now. But something changed. I suppose something did change. I don't know exactly when, but between the 1990s and the year 2000 must have been a good time for many places on Earth.
Yeah. Do you feel, I mean, I always think that the work, even when it's being uber contemporary, like you were talking about the Pure Necessity, which is based on a cartoon, but a cartoon where the animals are returned to their natural state. They're really animals. They're not cartoon animals, or they move and act as if they were animals. Do you think about precedents in the very strong and rich tradition of Belgian and Flemish art? I mean, you mentioned Bruegel earlier. Whenever I'm with you, I think we spend quite a lot of time talking about history, art history, and precedents. Are you somebody who's very consciously absorbing that, or is it very intuitive?
It's very intuitive. You know, I'm not at all occupied with that. The only moment where I get a little bit uncomfortable is when someone would question me about Belgian surrealism, and if there were something like a tradition of Magritte, because that's a paradox, it cannot possibly be a tradition in Magritte. Then I really wouldn't know what to answer on that. But
no, I'd probably be much more inclined to talk to you about Van Eyck than I would to talk to you about Magritte.
I'd be happy to talk about Van Eyck. We were lucky enough, and I'm so sad for everybody in this. You know what I'm going to say.
I know what you're going to say, and I'm heartbroken. Actually,
I saw the Van Eyck exhibition in Ghent, and probably everybody who saw it spoke about it, because I knew Van Eyck like everybody does, and still, you know, I managed to be absolutely blown away and recognize his. I even thought the title of the exhibition was not half bad. It was called An Optical Revolution, which is like, come on. But there is something in it. And I've been, with Corona, I've been reading and writing a little bit now for an exhibition on Hans Memling in Bruges, which has been postponed, but which will take place hopefully in autumn.
Fantastic. Exactly
on that period of like early Renaissance and Flemish painting and Flemish primitives. And what it was that, and I, you know, through that, the past months, I've had the chance to read up a little bit on things that we never, you know, or I, you know, stupid, I'm 50 years, but I never stopped to think about how do our eyes work? What's the evolution of sight in mammals and in human beings? And all these things that make you realize that, you know, the evolution of optics is, and actually the invention of the camera, the use of the lens and the disappearance of the lens into the numerical and all these things really are, they have a link with Van Eyck. I mean, Van Eyck is really flabbergasting when you, there's this sense of what I would describe as magnificence in evidence. There's almost a photographic evidence in his work. And then on the other hand, you know, you would think he's using all kind of instruments to depict his figures and his compositions, which probably was true. But since I worked with 3D imaging and 3D painting, I thought about Van Eyck and Memling in the extension a lot, in the sense that when you look at the way Van Eyck in the back of the altarpiece in Ghent, you have these black and white grisaille. And basically, when you look both at how the brain processes visual information and how 3D painting works, we're actually really close to that. There's a triangle. There's Van Eyck, there's 3D painting, and then there's the way the brain is processing visual information. Much more strikingly so than the way the camera, like film or digital, is recording through light. That has much more liberal origins. Well, I could go on for another hour.
So the title of the show is actually very, very accurate.
In a way, it was. I'm not entirely convinced that it was deliberate, or that it was.
But there, we do know. I mean, we do, not to dwell on Van Eyck too much, but we do know that there was an extraordinary moment of scientific exploration occurring at the time he was painting. That he was aware of those developments. That one of his closest friends was involved with telescopes and lenses. He must have been aware of all those developments. But I mean, one always has the sense that whatever technical equipment he had at his disposal, and however adept he was at using it, at the end of the day, he made paintings which absolutely transcended any formal technical, constraints.
Totally, yeah. I mean, this talk about the technical often is there as a way of eclipsing the plasticity of the brain.
Yeah.
Because I think evolution of sight is really the miracle of the way human beings developed sight from, let's say, very simple light-sensitive membrane up until a highly complicated lens system and visual cortex. So that's the real party going on, is this evolution, and the miracle of Van Eyck and Memling is that you can see this happening. Yeah, you see it happening in an artist.
And as a parallel, do you think that the moment we're living in terms of technology and the technological revolution that we're living in, which is allowing us to speak right now, is that affecting how we see and think?
100%. It's a interaction, or it's a game between the word. We became strong through the word and through vision. And usually there's a tradition also of criticizing the dominance of vision and of the way we're so intelligent in the way, what we can do with our sight. But I tend to doubt that. I tend to think that there's a reason why we live in a visual culture and why we live with the dominance of sight over other senses. There's a reason why we're talking to one another through sight, and then secondary through sound. But none of the other senses don't really count, temporarily at least. So it's not by coincidence, and I've developed what I don't want to sound pretentious, but I developed what I think might become a theory around dark optics, vision after the optical truth, vision after the camera, which in a nutshell allows what we would describe as insanity back into our daily evidence of seeing. And it's, I think a lot of...
What does that mean?
It's not, it's not insanity to me, but one might describe it as hallucination. Probably welcoming back hallucination into in perception. after it's been cast out since the Enlightenment.
In a sort of Henry Fuseli way, or how would that be manifest?
I don't know who you're talking about. In the who?
19th century Victorian painter Henry
yes, no.
Fuseli.
No, not at all. Not at all. In a street life. It's no coincidence that the camera, this optical evidence of the device being in between the author and the subject matter, it's no coincidence that this is an infant of enlightenment. This came shortly after the period of enlightenment and developed through industrial revolution. It's kind of automatic intelligence through sight. And I think what's typical of our time is that we're starting to lose confidence in that otherwise brilliant system which allows you and I to speak to one another. But I'm not entirely sure that within a century from now, the people that will be following our conversation will be following it exactly with the same kind of confidence system that we're looking at now. So, and I think that will and is already influencing or has an impact on the social and political realm.
Sure. I mean, if one abstracted that, you could think about the veracity of the medium and truth telling, and how easily that's all being manipulated and twisted right now, in all sorts of ways, politically, obviously, the most obvious.
So this magnificence in evidence that we found back in Van Eyck is, I think, is going through another process as we speak. It's
interesting.
It was really a key point in their time around the 15th century, and we're at another turning point now. We've gone through a period of roughly 200 years of kind of stable situation, and I think we're getting into not so calm sea.
Which by coincidence kind of neatly parallels the period of the invention of photography.
Yes, there's no no coincidence.
So it's totally fascinating, and I mean, I would also sort of love to talk to you further about the fact that photography was Herschel and the early photographers were also the same people who were working on grinding the lenses for telescopes, which were looking out into the universe at the same time as they were trying to fix the image of us here on Earth. That's a huge conversation we could have at some point, and I'd love to have with you. But because we got started a little late, we're running rather late. And the one thing I must do before we let you go is I want to ask you what you're working on right now.
I'm working on, I finished a piece called Wildfire. It's got a long title, Meditation on Fire. And it's going to be a very relaxing work.
Oh, I know if you say that, we're in trouble.
But it's a study on the architecture of fire. One could say it's a frozen moment of a big bushfire, and it's emphasizing on the crystallization that's occurring in the image as you go through the process of watching it. It's around 20 minutes, I think. I haven't seen it for a while. I haven't seen it since Corona. I finished it since Corona in March. And since then, I've been working on a black and white work that's been long overdue. And I thought we're either going to do it now or I'm going to trash it. And it's titled The Aircraft Final Assembly Line. It's a real-time situation, which again, in the beginning I did these two fingers, 1+1, which tries to bring about an energy between situation which is in the 1950s of a newly constructed aircraft in an hangar somewhere in Chicago. And there's guards. It's at night and nobody's around, but just a few guards wasting their time like in a museum. It's a huge space. It's a single video screen in black and white. And it's very, very precise. It's going to be a 4K projection. And you can see all the materials. You can see the wood. During the time of the Second World War, there was no, short of steel, so it's all in wood. Then there's the aluminum of the aircraft, and then there's the man that guard the airplane. But they guard it in real time, and there's the camera going around like in Olympia. And you're thrown back and forward between past and present. So that's the exercise. It's a bridge. I hope it will work. I'm not sure. It's a risky piece.
Well, time is always a huge personality in your filmmaking. And it seems the perfect moment to reflect upon the use of time at a moment when we all perhaps have a little more time than we've been used to, which is the perfect metaphor for watching a David Claerbout film.
Isn't that great? I mean, we are all so conditioned by by chronometry.
Yeah.
By the idea that time can be measured and that time can be atomized and that time can be cut up into market shares and has a certain value. But there's no such thing as the division of time. And one of the beauties of Corona, there's also a lot of misery attached to it, but one of the beauties of it as well is that maybe there's an occasion of getting rid of chronometer time.
Well, I suspect that we'll have to return to chronometric time rather more soon than we anticipate. At least I hope we do. But it's been a bit of a privilege to have this time. In certain respects, obviously, that's been imposed upon us. But anyway, on that note, David, I should let you go. It's late for you, and you've got a beer to finish. I've finished my tea. It's always fascinating to talk to you. You're one of my favorite people to spend time thinking with, and I'd love to pick up the conversation about photography and dark optics. We'll do it another time. It's lovely to see you.
We'll have another tea time.
We'll have another tea time. But next time, get the camera on early.
Bye, Sean.
Bye.
Take care. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Take care. Bye.